Hello, and if you're watching the video, welcome to this episode of Five Alarm Task Force. If you're listening to the audio, glad to have you back. My name is Steve Green. I'm your host today, and my guest today is Chief Brandon Fletcher. Chief Fletcher is the chief of the Gilt Edge Fire Department in West Tennessee and a 21-year student of the fire service. He is a second-generation firefighter with a background as both a volunteer and career firefighter in rural, suburban, and airport industrial settings. Chief Fletcher holds a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Tennessee, Martin, and is a graduate of the Texas A&M Fire Service Chief Executive Officer Program. He is a designated Chief Fire Officer and Chief Training Officer through the Center for Public Safety Excellence. He is a member of the Institution of Fire Engineers and currently serves as a member of the Fire Service Occupational Safety and Fire Officer Professional Qualifications and FPA Technical Committees. Chief Fletcher also serves as a commissioner for the Center for Public Safety Excellence Commission on Professional Credentialing. Chief, welcome to the show. Glad we were finally able to make it.
Yes, Steve, thanks for having me. It is good to be here.
I appreciate your patience. This mystery malady has taken its toll on numerous podcast guests and myself as well. So we're glad that we're able to finally make it work. And what I want to talk with you about, as we mentioned before we came on air, is what we're facing. You're the chief of a volunteer fire department. It's all volunteer, or do you have a mix?
It's all volunteer.
All volunteer. So you really are one of those departments with a good-sized district, almost 40 square miles, as you mentioned, 4,000 residents, and one department, one station, and you guys keep pretty busy in the course of a year.
Yes, sir. We do around 540, 550 calls a year, mostly EMS, like a lot of departments. Right. But I think our percentage may be a little bit lower. I think we're more the 65 to 70% on EMS, and then we have a pretty robust automatic aid response on structure fires and motor vehicle accidents with entrapment. So that kind of makes up the rest of the bulk. Right. Of the calls. But yes, we do stay pretty busy for a single station.
Right. Do you do ALS or just BLS?
BLS, I do have one paramedic, and hopefully we have a couple of folks moving into paramedic school as they wrap up their advanced EMT school as well. And so that'll kind of grow our capabilities a little bit as well. Right.
Do you transport, or is there a separate transport?
No, sir. So we do, the first responder, non-transport EMS. We have a private ambulance company that serves Tipton County, and so any medical call, we go out and we back them up, or we get there first and assess and stabilize, and then they show up the transport.
Yeah, back in my first station in North Carolina, same thing. We responded on the rescues, met EMS on scene, and helped them as we could through that. And at that time, it was a pretty good deal. The area wasn't quite as large as it is now down in Guilford County, but it was a great opportunity for a kid like me who never planned on being a firefighter, just admired firefighters, to wind up totally by accident walking into a fire station, just say hello and look at the apparatus. Next thing I know, I walked out with an application.
Right.
I'm sure you might be that same kind of a chief, that somebody walks in and looks at the apparatus and say, ever thought of being a firefighter?
It goes that way sometimes. We have a few community events. We joke with one of our guys that joined us through one of those events. We do a Halloween event every year. We've been doing it for the last 3 or 4 years, where families bring the kids and everything. We've got candy, and we set up a couple of little props and stuff that the kids can do. And we had one bring the kids down and struck up a conversation. That's usually what I do. I'm just kind of wandering around, just talking to people, and, find out where you live. Oh, you live just right up the road from the station. Have you ever thought about being a firefighter? And they actually had, and it worked out. And he's one of our go-getters on the department. Been with us for a couple of years now.
That's great. That's great. And the fact that, you have a very mixed service area. You have rural, you have suburban. Our good friends, Nick Peppard and Sean Duffy, have their podcast, Make Do. And it's all about just that, making do with what you got, because you may not get any more. And,
that's absolutely the truth. That's right. How we operate.
Right. And, as the fact that they came up with was that about 80% of us in the U.S. as firefighters, whether career or volunteer or part pay, whatever. Basically, we deal with suburban environments. That's the majority of us. Yeah, there are the big cities like New York and Chicago, LA County, stuff like that. But most of us deal with that. And you're showing that because uh, you've been a volunteer and career in rural, in suburban, and airport industrial settings. So you know those levels of response and activity that's doing that. And what I want to address with you, and we'll get to your article in a bit, but I want to talk about, we all know it's very out there and we're trying to do something about it, how difficult the situation the volunteer fire service is in now. Way different than my day, 40 some years ago. My wife and I had been married for a couple of years. We had no kids yet. She worked full time as a teacher, and I was working full time at my paid job at a local synagogue. And so it allowed me to, and she allowed me, I should say also, to spend a lot of time, because I decided if I was going to do it, I want to do it right, and spent as much time. I didn't just wait for training night. Anytime I had free time, every lunch, basically, if I didn't have an appointment, I'd be running down to the state, eating lunch there, maybe catch a call or two. But it's different today. In a lot of families, both parents are working. One, if not both, might be working another part-time job. There's all these after-school activities for the kids. There's not a lot of time in America for volunteers, or we need to encourage them to make the time. Are you seeing that in your department as well?
Absolutely. It is a challenge to balance the work life, the home life. People, it is common, to have multiple jobs, and, the kids are going every which direction with, ball games and different activities and everything. So absolutely, it certainly is a challenge. And we do feel that. I see it across the board when I travel, to volunteer departments, volunteer stations. It's a mix, though. I think a lot of times in the volunteer fire service, we want to fall back on that as kind of a crutch. It's not our fault. It's society's fault. It's the change in the generations. It's the change in, people's, work-life balance, so on and so forth. And while some of that is true, I'm not eliminating that. We have to take a look internally at ourselves and say, hey, okay, so maybe the way that we've always been doing things doesn't work now because of those changes with generations and society. And we have to look internally and try to make some fixes or changes in how we do business to maybe better accommodate people's schedules, give them more options and more opportunities to volunteer the best they can with whatever that they have going on in life. And I mean, I'll be the first to say we are very, very high tempo when it comes to training. It seems like we always have something going on, whether we're hosting a class, whether it's weekly drill, whether it's special operations drill, twice a month, in addition to a weekly drill. We send folks regularly to conferences and different places and stuff out of state. And so we actually last year probably got a little too heavy on the accelerator, and so we've kind of dialed it back a little bit this year. But that is a challenge, and I have a very, very motivated group of folks that do enjoy training. And I think that there's a lot of maybe fear or apprehension on the leadership side to try to push the way that we have to kind of raise the bar and raise the standards, because, as I'm commonly say, it's not 1986 anymore. And the reason I picked 1986 is that was the year that the Gilt Edge Fire Department went operational. And the way things were done in 1986 worked for 1986. And, and it progressed forward, and EMS was added in the early to mid 90s. And, of course, that changed things. That was something else you got to train on, something else you got to maintain currency on. And so we've had to adapt and shift. And there's departments that have not done that. They have continued to maintain that same model that, goes back to whatever, late 70s, mid 80s, when they were founded. We don't have a lot of departments in our area with 100 years of tradition and what have you. Most of the volunteer fire departments in our area came to be in the late 70s and early 80s. And you just got to stay current with what's happening in your area Firefighting is local. Recruitment and retention is local. There's a lot of great ideas that you can get that'll work in a lot of places, but you got to tweak them. Everybody's looking for a magic pill. How do I fix my recruitment problem? How do I retain the members that I have? And there's not a magic pill. You have to be able to, adapt to your local surroundings, your local culture, and, be willing to look internal and say, hey, maybe we're part of the problem and we need to make some changes as well.
That's an important issue that you bring up. And I think that this has been on the show. I mean, we're getting ready to close up our 6th season, but one of the things we've talked about that a lot of people don't realize is that with about approximately 1.2 million firefighters in the U.S., that the vast majority, over 70% of the U.S., is protected by volunteers or part pay. Departments with whether you have sleep in twice a month or whatever. But those are the people who are protecting the vast majority of the population and in the communities of the United States. And I think that it's important that with a chief like you and your leadership, and I'm sure many of the chiefs that that are operating in the 2022 model, we'll call it, and also around the country and from the NVFC as well, to educate our public just how much the volunteer and part paid departments do for our communities, because so many communities are in dire need already with few volunteers. We've seen a couple of last week on one of the news emails from one of the trades. There was a department closing temporarily because they didn't have enough volunteers, and there was a few other problems there, and they're going to have surrounding departments answer the calls. That's when you see it in print, it seems very easy, but for that to actually happen, and to make sure that the people who are responding to the calls, as well as the citizens and the community, are well protected, because we can't give them an excuse that we can't come to your house to lift that tree off anybody because we don't have enough people to do it. But give us a call later in the day. Maybe we'll be able to come out then. We can't do that. We don't have that choice. Good.
I'm sorry.
No.
I don't know who said it originally, but I've seen it float around social media, and we use it extensively in the department. But the quote, being a volunteer is no excuse for mediocrity. And I believe that firmly. That there are departments that have the mindset that, well, we're just volunteers. And I hate to hear that. If somebody from the public says, oh, they're just volunteers, I don't like it, but I can live with it, because they're probably just not educated on how the fire service works. There's an assumption that because a department is a paid department, that's automatically equals a greater level of service. And we all know there are really, really good paid departments. There are really, really bad paid departments. There are really, really good volunteer departments, and there are really, really bad volunteer departments. But when the culture within the volunteer organization adopts the mantra that we're just volunteers, I think that's a recipe for disaster, because we know that the fire doesn't care whether you're paid or volunteer. The situation doesn't care whether it's a technical rescue, whether it's an EMS call. It doesn't matter. And quite frankly, when Mrs. Smith dials 911, she doesn't say, hey, send me the paid fire department, send me the whatever fire. They just say, send me the fire department. And they have an expectation that whoever gets off the big red truck is going to be able to handle the situation, whatever that case may be. And we have to prepare with that mentality that we may be called to face any possible scenario out there that exists, regardless of our pay status. And while it's not financially feasible, to be an expert in every single discipline that we may face, not everybody is going to be able to have a technical rescue team or a hazmat team or any of the special disciplines. we ought to be able to master the basics of fire and EMS service delivery, and probably some basic vehicle extrication along with that. We should be masters of that regardless of whether we're paid or volunteer, and then have a plan, whatever that may be, whether it's depending on mutual aid, automatic aid, what have you, to manage the rest of the problems that we may come up with. Simply, hey, we're just volunteers serving our community, trying to do the best we can, might have been acceptable in 1986, but it's not acceptable in 2022. There is an expectation. Now, with that, I grant, people get what they pay for, and I don't mean that as a slight towards volunteer firefighters. I mean in what they're willing to fund the fire department. There are fire departments operating on, $5,000 a year. How do you function with $5,000 a year? We're fortunate. We operate on about $87,000 a year, which is still pretty low, but it gives us what we need, and we supplement that with grant funding and other funding avenues, as needs arise. But I know what it takes to operate my fire department at $87,000 a year, and what the cost of my insurance is, and what the cost of my fuel is, which is skyrocketing currently. I don't know how you do that when you're not funded adequately by your city, your county, or whatever your jurisdiction is. And we're asking volunteer firefighters to give up countless hours for just the basic level of training. Okay, just to be a firefighter, just to be emergency medical responder, maybe EMT, whatever the case may be. Countless hours of that. Not to mention the risk, not to mention the time away from their families, so on and so forth. And then, we want them to come run bingo games and fish fries and spaghetti suppers, so they've got enough money to put fuel in the trucks. And I just think that that's absolutely ridiculous, that, fire protection is not looked at universally across the country as an essential service and funded accordingly.
That's a great point, considering also that when we were talking off air before we started recording, that you've already set up automatic mutual aid with surrounding communities for assistance based on the call. It's not,
Sure.
So, I think, and we're seeing this more and more, but I think it's great in a community like yours and the surrounding communities that, one of the things you mentioned about Mrs. Smith is that our late great leader, Chief Bruno, when he talked about his adages and his sayings, it had nothing to do whether it was a career or volunteer department. It was you are a firefighter, and your job, and our job, I shouldn't say our job is to take care of Mrs. Smith on her worst possible day, even if that worst day is her cat is up a tree.
Sure, absolutely.
And he didn't say, well, you're going to have to respond because you're a paid department, or don't worry about the cat, you're a volunteer, don't worry about if you can't get in. He didn't say that at all. He is, and his wisdom that we still share today is almost like a beacon in the night for all fire departments. If we had adopt many of the things that he taught us over the years in his articles, in his presentations at the national conferences, at regional conferences, he was wonderful letting people knock on the door at the firehouse, and he'd welcome them in to sit and have coffee with him and say, oh, you're a firefighter, tell me about it. Mm-hmm. And he gave us he really provided us a sense of family and community on a national basis. And more, maybe even greater than that, maybe on an international basis as well, because I've heard from guests outside of the U.S. who have talked about Chief Bruno and what they learned from him in his articles and some of his classes. And so you brought up a great point that we can't operate today in 2022 like the old days. Not your department, really not any department should be operating that way. Now, it's true. Every department is different. The circumstances are different. The communities are different. Taxes, funding, et cetera, are always different. But that doesn't change. Our job doesn't change, though. Our jobs are exactly the same. Every day of every month, 12 months a year, our job stays the same. We have to do it and we have to get it done. And we have to do everything we can. And if that means for a smaller volunteer department, we're going to run the fish fries. We're going to have a barbecue. We're going to have car wash. So we can raise that money to maybe buy some more radios or buy some new bunker gear, or at least buy an extractor so we can clean our bunker gear with what's going on. Then that's what it takes. And we need to let the community know, and we should be doing, and I've said this before, but we should be doing PR at
Absolutely.
any contact we have with that's not an emergency contact with the citizens. When we go to pick up the food at the market for dinner that night that we've all tossed in for, we should have a couple of little flyers in our pockets so that if we run into a mom or dad with their kid, especially, and they say, "You're a fireman?" Yeah. And you give them a little pamphlet with an Edith drill on it, or stop, drop, and roll, or something like that. And this is our department. Our station is right around the corner from the market here. Well, stop by and visit us, and would love to have you give your kids a tour of the station. That's what we have to do, because if we invest some time in public relations, that is going to lead hopefully to a change in our fundraising and
Sure.
how the community sees us as a volunteer department.
We have to look at, and this is something Tiger Schmittendorf talks about in his classes, with recruitment, retention, marketing, and everything, is every public interaction that we have is a recruitment opportunity. And by that same token, every public interaction that we have is a marketing opportunity. It's an educational opportunity. And it doesn't always have to be about fire prevention, although that's very, very important. It could just be a simple conversation of what we do, how we operate. A lot of people, even though I think we do a pretty decent job in marketing and branding and putting information out about what we're doing, we still run into people that had no idea that the fire department was a volunteer fire department. They moved out here from wherever, and if they've ever had to call 911, we showed up. They never knew that it was paid or volunteer, or if they haven't had to call 911, they just assumed that every place is protected by a paid fire department, and they have no idea that no, it's pretty much all volunteer or combination departments in the county that we live in, and that we depend heavily on volunteers. And if the conversation kind of goes the right direction, hey, this is how we're funded. And there's definitely places that are in much worse situations than we are, but there's also a lot of places that are in better situations funding wise than we are. But it is a public education campaign, not just on the community risk reduction side of the house, but also just in how things operate at the local level. And so I teach a class called Shaping Your Volunteer Fire Department to meet today's expectations. And so we talk about leadership because it all starts with leadership. It doesn't matter. Everything starts with leadership. We talk about training because training is absolutely critical to what we do. And training also ties in very heavily, I believe, into retention. But we also address recruiting specifically, retention specifically, and then marketing of your department. And all of those have to come together, and we have to do it a little differently than we did in 1986 in order to be successful. But absolutely, so the marketing component, is not just marketing for recruitment, but marketing for education, marketing for funding, letting the people know. I mean, we've had situations where, there's been a little tension, politically regarding the fire department. It's been 10, 11 years ago. And the amount of members of the public that came to our defense, that stood up for the fire department because they had seen, and this was, kind of a lot of it pre-social media, in 2010, 2011, 2012, we did not have a huge social media presence. We just had a strong community presence because we had been operating since 1986. And to have the public, stand up for the fire department and say, no, these guys are doing a great job, and we need to continue to support them. was just absolutely humbling and huge. And if you ever find yourself in that type of situation, you're going to realize how important it is to engage the public at every opportunity and do so in a positive manner anytime the opportunity presents itself.
Right. And I couldn't agree with you more that we must make that effort. And it's not always easy. Even in my field, the nonprofit, asking for money was always a little bit difficult for me because I'm not a money person. I like to do things just for the sake of doing them, and volunteered for 8 years until I got hurt and I couldn't do it anymore. But I think that I don't know if our public, when we think about it, they are very astute on what certain things of the modern day of 2022. But I think there are a lot of things they don't really know about in 2022. And part of that is, as you mentioned, when they call 911, who's going to show up?
Sure.
And if people who've lived in the community for a while, well, they're going to know the department and volunteer or a combination, whatever. But people coming in or people visiting, driving through your district, there's an auto accident, heaven forbid, then you folks show up, they get to see you in action. They get to see, well, how did you have all these people if you're just a little volunteer department? Well, because we plan for incidents like these so that we have enough of our team people. And positive, anything positive that we can do in the volunteer fire service, that will be a magnet in a way to bring interest. Donations are a separate thing. When we go take a break, I'm going to give you an idea I'm not sure if you've done it, but I'll give you an idea that worked well for one of my departments. But it comes down to a matter of education, both the public for who you are and what you do, and in your recruitment of new people. It's all about getting the message across of who we are and what we do. And sometimes it's great coming from a person with 10 or more years in to talk to that recruit. And sometimes it's great for a volunteer who's only been in a year or two to talk to them and said, yeah, I didn't even know they were volunteers when I stopped by the station just to see the apparatus. The next thing I know, I'm signing up to be a volunteer. It's been great I've been here like 17 months now, and it's been great. When you have a messenger like that, or I'm not going to say the old timer, but the person with a lot more experience, a messenger like that, he or she are putting themselves out for any department to help bring in more people and help educate the public. And that's the key. So we don't just fight fires. We don't just do medical rescues or MVCs. As we call ourselves now, I guess we're an all hazards department.
Sure.
It used to be in my day, we were a fire service that had a rescue. Now we're an EMS service that has an engine, and some people like it, some people don't like that. But the fact is that's what today is. As you said, it's not the 70s of my time. It's not 86 when your department started. It's 2022. And we're already looking ahead to what the future is going to hold for the fire service. I've had a couple of episodes on the EFO series, the Executive Fire Officer series, where we've talked about the concept of where that came from and why it's so important, especially today. Not just our past leaders who are now in their late 60s, early 70s or more, but the EFO is just as important today for our new and up and coming leaders of the fire service. And so, if a candidate has their bachelor's degree, then that opens up that door a little bit to go to that EFO program. It's not an easy program. And folks, if you didn't hear our 2 episodes, please listen to them. It talks part one and part two of the EFO, of the Executive Fire Officer, with some of the people that were actually part of the initiation of the EFO when it first started, before it was even called the EFO. They were writing papers and doing that. And that, of course, takes place at our, I like to call it our most sacred place for the fire service, which is Emmitsburg, Maryland, at the National Fire Academy, and where our brothers and sisters are remembered who made the ultimate sacrifice. So it's going to be a challenge. Being a firefighter, EMT, firefighter medic, has never really been easy. If you're really doing your job right and it's easy, it's a real quiet department, a real quiet station.
Sure.
But if you come home pretty tired after a call or after a good drill, and you say, wow, that was great. I really learned something about those knots that I just I couldn't fathom before. Now I can tie them inside out and backwards. That's the good stuff. That's sure. That's what we do. And we also have to remember to incorporate, especially today, concerns about our firefighters' physical well-being. We have a lot of challenges today. First it was just, we thought the cancer in the fire service was all related to the pile. Then we found out, guess what? It's not. We have firefighters all over the country getting cancer who had nothing to do with the pile at 9/11.
For fire, keeping force, stand by for run.
That yours?
No, that's going to be a neighboring department.
Okay.
But yeah, I glanced over. I saw the radio key up, and so that's.
I know.
I was kind of looking, but no, that wasn't us.
That's all right. Not a problem.
Let me turn that down, though. I don't know if you can hear that or not.
It's just music to our ears in this business.
One for fire, keeping four. One for fire.
Yeah, that's a neighboring department going out on that.
But the concept is that we know our challenges today, and from the chief on down to the newest recruit, we have to be ready to stand up, not to just answer calls, but to stand up for our department and do everything we can within our power. We're not asking anybody to necessarily take more time away from their families or whatever their other community activities that they partake in. We just want them to understand how important they are to us. And so when we tell them, hey, are you up to date on the cancer initiative? Have you told your physician that you're a firefighter? Did you tell them what you're exposed to sometimes? Right now we're at a point where we can't even call dumpster fire routine anymore because we don't know what the hell's burning in the dumpster.
True.
And we need to make sure that our men and women are well aware of the cancer initiative, everything we're doing to help reduce exposure and educate about exposure and what to look for, and to share that with your family and your personal physician. And the same thing goes for behavioral health today. As I was just talking with a friend last night, we see crap that we don't want anybody else to have to see. And we don't do it because of that. We do it in spite of that, because somebody has to do it. And we say I'm going to be one of those people to help my community. And it's not easy. My day was the day of the days of suck it up. That quote, I love that quote, suck it up. And I was told that to me once after one of my worst calls that my buddy and I were on. And thank goodness I can't say for the most part, but it appears that our behavioral health initiative is getting out there, and more departments, more and more departments are understanding that when a firefighter of 7, 8, 10 years comes back from a really messy call, and he or she just isn't their usual self for that call, that's where we need to recognize that and not be afraid to walk over and say, hey, you okay? That was a pretty gnarly call that we were on there, it was tough. And let them open up, encourage them to open up and share, because if we're going to keep them, we're going to keep him or her as members of our departments. We have to make sure that they're okay with the job they're doing. And, it's not always getting that Mrs. Smith's cat down from the tree.
Right.
They get a lot more complicated than that. It's a great adage that he created for that and for the fire service. But even today, I think that Chief Brandon would be surprised at our all hazards aspect. He probably brought that into Phoenix and expanded their eyes as well and their duties while he was there. But we've gone even beyond that, and luckily his sons and other people who studied with him carry on that tradition today at conferences and on podcasts and stuff like that. And I think we should encourage our members to listen to a fire service podcast, because you don't always have to go to a class. You don't always have to leave home and stay away for 2 nights. You can be, washing the driveway down, washing the car, vacuuming the house, and you can still be listening to great firefighters talk about key issues that we're all facing today and learning, and it doesn't cost you a dime.
It is absolutely overwhelming, the number of podcasts that are out there. I know when I first started listening to podcasts, that at first there was just a couple, and so you could pretty much stay current and up to speed with all the different episodes, and then it just kind of branched out from there, and it's like, oh, which one do I listen to today? I travel a lot, and so it's usually a toss up, between an audiobook, which is probably going to be something on leadership, or a podcast, or do I just want to listen to music today? But no, it is that there is so much information available to you through so many different podcasts out there that the opportunity to stay current and learn while doing other things is just there's no excuse.
Exactly.
No excuse. But I'd like to circle back to something. So talking about the National Fire Academy at Emmitsburg, and let me echo absolutely what an amazing place that is. I've taken several classes. I think I almost qualified for Maryland residency last year with the classes that I took, and hopefully I've got to finish the paperwork side on my end and get some T's crossed and I's dotted. But hopefully I'll be coming on staff with the hazmat program. Maybe all that'll be complete by the time this goes on the air. But the opportunities that you have there, not just from what you learn in the classroom, and sometimes, maybe you get a class that, maybe it's not outstanding, but generally it's going to be outstanding. That is the National Fire Academy standard. But the social interaction that you get from people from all over the country, doesn't matter, career, volunteer, combination, it's completely irrelevant. The stuff that you get to learn from meeting those other folks from who knows where, it's just, you can't put that in a book. You can't put that in a classroom. It's just something that you have to experience. And so I'm a huge fan of the National Fire Academy and think that everybody should get there at least once. And I know it's difficult, on the volunteer side, especially with the 2-week classes or even 1-week classes, but take advantage of your state weekend and at least, get up there for a 2-day class. And by the same token, encouraging folks to get outside of their little bubble, and whether that's a regional conference, a state level conference, or a national conference such as Firehouse or FDIC, get out there and learn from other people and bring that stuff back. I'm gonna be honest with you, that's one of our biggest keys to success. So, it's kind of funny. 8 years ago, so I just returned from the Metro Atlanta Firefighter Conference. MAFC is what they call it for short. And so 8 years ago, 4 members of my department we all piled in my truck. We pooled our gas money and hotel money and all that, and we drove to Atlanta for the Metro Atlanta Firefighter Conference. And that was our first out-of-state conference. So we had done some regional conferences within the state and everything, but that was our first time going out of state and learning from people literally from coast to coast, from Los Angeles City to FDNY to all parts in between as far as instructors were concerned. And we were exposed to that, and we took notes, and we got wonderful ideas, and we brought that back. And honestly, I never thought that 8 years later that I would be teaching at the Metro Atlanta Firefighter Conference. So that was kind of a little full circle event for me. But that's where I tell people, that's where that's all started. 4 of us said, hey, we want to get out and we want to learn more about what's going on in the fire service. And that same group of 4, we drove 13 hours to Nebraska, to Kearney, Nebraska for the Les Lucas Winter Conference. Never imagined that 6 years later I would be teaching at that conference. And last year they even let me keynote the banquet.
Wow.
So
Congratulations.
that was amazing. But again, same deal. 4 of us piled up in the truck, and we drove 13 hours to Nebraska in February, by the way, to hear people from all over the country come and share their experiences and their ideas. And we brought that stuff back to our department, and we started implementing change, slowly but surely, incorporated new ideas. And, we were ridiculed. We were made fun of, not so much internally within the department, but, externally from other departments, of, oh, why are you doing this? This isn't the East Coast. This isn't New York. This isn't, whatever, name whatever big city or whatever, city or state. And, we caught a lot of flack for these radical ideas in this, in this training that it's funny, as you fast forward over the last, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, that slowly have started to trickle into these other departments just over time. But, that's what broadened our horizons and really kind of set the tone within our department to kind of maintain that currency and that relevancy, and it wasn't just, going to, so a lot of our guys went to nozzle forward, and they enjoyed that. And we implement a lot of the stuff from that particular class in our training of our recruits. But it was going to classes on recruitment and retention and leadership and marketing your department and public relations and, the stuff that's maybe not as glamorous as the hands-on firefighting training, which we did plenty of that too. And so it wasn't just picking one particular area. It was picking a whole multitude of areas. And based on, your position, hey, you know what? You're the chief, you're the deputy chief, maybe you don't want to sit through this class, but this is a class that, as a chief or deputy chief, you need to sit through. Okay. And so maybe you have to sacrifice one of the fun classes for something that's, a little more administrative, because you need that information, you need that knowledge. And so I can't encourage folks enough to get outside of your local bubble and learn how other people do things. And while you might not be able to take an idea from, the city of Chicago or New York and implement it exactly how they do because of staffing, I guarantee you there are things that they do or that any other fire department in the country does that if you look at it and say, you know what, if we tweak this, this, and this to fit our model, this would work for us and it would work better than what we're currently doing. And just being open-minded to change, and if you try an idea, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Right.
Try something else. So
Great point.
That's my soapbox about, getting out of your bubble, whether it's the National Fire Academy or, whichever conference that, there's a million conferences now going on all over the place as well. So,
right. All right. Well, that's great. And it's a great point of getting the concept of the NF, the National Fire Academy, out there to people, as you said, take them out of their comfort zones and let them really learn something else from other people as well who are specialized in teaching that. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break here. If you're watching the video, you're not going to notice any difference. If you're listening to the audio, well, you know what happens. You'll hear a little music, then we'll do some of our public service announcements, and then we'll be right back with our guest, Chief Brandon Fletcher, right after these words. As always, please stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to this episode of Five Alum Task Force. I'm your host, Steve Green. With me as my guest today is Chief Brandon Fletcher of the Gilt Edge Fire Department in West Tennessee, 21-year student of the fire service and a second-generation firefighter. Chief, let's talk about something that I just saw. Actually, I think it was yesterday that you're having an article published in one of the national trades.
Yes, sir. So it went live, I think, on the 16th. But yes, sir. Firehouse Magazine just published one of my articles in the Volunteer View column. It's basically leadership, retention through leadership, because we often talk about recruitment and retention together, kind of like, and I make this analogy in the article with regard to salvage and overhaul. We talk about those like they're the same. They're one single task, but they're actually they're vastly different. Well, same thing with recruitment and retention. Recruitment and retention always gets lumped together, but recruitment is one thing, and it's important, but so is retaining those that we recruit. And so the impact that leadership has on that is something that's often overlooked. As we said, previously, everything in the department starts with leadership. And the environment that you create, the culture that you create, defines who you retain in your organization and who you lose in your organization. And, coming to that kind of hard reality sometimes that first, not everybody needs to be a firefighter. That is the reality. And sometimes in the volunteer departments, we become more obsessed with the number of people that we have on our roster versus the quality of people that we have on our roster. And I've heard these bragging points, from, again, departments that I would say are struggling. We got 30 people on the roster. We got 25 people on the roster. But, you never can turn out more than one or two, on a structure fire for mutual aid. So, what good are these 20-something people when you struggle to get, two people to respond to any call? And so I'm a big proponent of quality over quantity, and particularly, retaining our high-performing members. I use in the article, it's a Nick Saban quote with regard to, high achievers don't like mediocre people don't like high achievers. And that's something I've definitely seen, through military experience, through fire service experience. Those two kind of folks clash. Your high performers or your go-getters, they're wanting to get things done. They're wanting to make things happen. And then you've got your mediocre folks that, maybe they just want the t-shirt. They want to say that they're a firefighter. They don't want to put in the work that's required. And, they want things to be more of a good old boy social club than, a high performing team or organization. And so kind of tweaking your culture and your leadership style to essentially develop high performers, retain your high performers, and weed out the mediocrity is what I have found to be the best path to success.
That's a great point, and a good friend of the show and a great supporter, and he's been on the show before, Chief Tony Correa, when we did a podcast regarding retention and recruitment. One of the things that he said, and it stuck with me since this, is if you don't take care of retention first, you're not going to get any recruitment.
Right.
Because you've got to keep the people who are working with you happy and fulfilled, and they'll go out and get you the other people. But if you have problems with retention, you're going to have a lot of problems with recruitment.
And I think on the retention side of the house too, I think we look at, losing people as just automatically like that's a negative thing. And it's like, it's not. Sometimes you lose people that you need to lose. And the organization is better off because those people left, right, whether it's voluntarily or, you had to nudge them in the right direction. I like to use the term manage them off the team because, sometimes it's very rare that I ever have had just to outright just tell somebody you're done, you're gone, bye, turn your stuff in. I've wanted to, but I generally, we have a conversation. We kind of look at the entire situation. We examine the facts, and I try to politely kind of paint the picture, where the individual can see that where they're not meeting the organizational expectations, and give them an opportunity to bow out with some some dignity and some grace, and maybe leave that door open to return maybe down the road. After some time has passed, maybe there's some things have changed in their life. Maybe some maturity has occurred, and what have you. But we look at, we just had two people quit. Oh my gosh, what are we doing wrong? You may not be doing anything wrong. Maybe those two people needed to go for the betterment of the organization, and so being willing to sit down and have those I call them courageous conversations, because it is hard to sit someone down and basically know that I'm essentially going to point out where you're not meeting the team's expectations, and try to gently and gracefully nudge you out the door. That's a hard conversation to have.
Sure.
Most people don't want to sit down and have that conversation. And by the same token, you also have to have some progress along the way. Like, it doesn't need to be 6 months after this individual has not been meeting the organizational standards that, okay, we're going to have the conversation to nudge them out the door. What did you do in between? From the time that they joined the department, did you adequately explain your expectations on the front end? If they were not meeting those expectations, maybe you missed an expectation. Did you sit down and have a conversation along the way and say, hey, let's just make sure we're on the same page here with regard to expectations, because you can't enforce or uphold a standard that you've never established. So if you're upset with somebody's performance, you have to first ask yourself, was the expectation clearly defined and explained to the individual so they know what right looks like? They know what they're supposed to be doing before we just come down on them. And so I'm a huge fan of, if somebody's, starting to struggle or not meet the expectations, I generally let one of the company officers, if I see it, if they don't see it first, I let one of the company officers know, hey, I'm noticing this, and this with an individual. I don't know if you've seen it, but maybe, keep an eye out, or, have that conversation. And we start at the lowest level. By the time you're sitting down with the fire chief, it's probably, the company officers have tried everything they can to salvage your career and expectations here. But having that conversation and being willing to say, hey, not everybody is a fit for the organization, instead of keeping folks around that don't want to perform at a high level. And then that becomes very, very, very unmotivating for your high performers. And when your high performers start walking out the door, you've got serious problems in the organization. When mediocrity walks out the door, I don't lose any sleep over it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've told the story before on the podcast, but it bears repeating with what you've just said. I was been on the department, I think it was 4.5 months, to the training, the weekly training, three weeks a month, and then the other fourth week was the business meeting, and got called on a working house fire, made it to the first due engine out, and with another one of the firefighters, also voted in the same time I had been voted in, and lieutenant going up the street, the captain who was riding the right seat, turned around the window and said, Steve, I want you to pull the nozzle, and so you're going to pull the spaghetti and straighten it out, then back Steve up. So that's the way we did it. We came in, we were letting the second engine was going to connect the package to the hydrant, and we stretched the line. The captain was right next to me, opened the water. It was a pantry, laundry area, but it was cooking pretty well. It was my first time on the nozzle, and the captain guided me, and the guy behind me was terrific, taking the pressure off. And then after about 7-8 minutes, he says, okay, let's close it and we'll take a look at it and see what's done. So I closed the bail and turned around to thank the guy who was sitting in the other seat on the engine with me. He wasn't there. It was somebody else, one of the other members. So I turned to the captain and I said, what's his name? He said, oh, he's okay. Just go talk to the chief. So I said, oh, talk to the chief. That's not good. If it comes from the captain, I must have messed something up. But I went to the chief and I said, hey, listen, chief, this is what happened. But when I turned around, he wasn't there. Is he okay? Chief said he's fine. He just wasn't comfortable making entry with that much fire. I said, oh, wow, I understand that. There was a lot of fire there. I said, you're not going to throw him out, are you? He goes, oh, hell no. He says, no. I've talked to him. He's going to do a lot of stuff on the fire ground for us. He'll help throw ladders, help, get equipment up tied to the ropes so you can lift stuff up. He goes, no, we have a great place for him. To me, that was leadership in a small combination department. All the firefighters were, except for the day person and the officer, but the rest of us were all volunteers. Now, another chief would have just said, you know what, you couldn't find the cars to go in there, then I don't think you belong in this department. But our chief looked at it from the value of this person who wanted to be a volunteer in our department. Not everybody's cut out to make entry into a work and fire.
Sure.
And not, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It just means that the department will make an accommodation wherever possible to keep that in mind and not expect you to go in on nozzle or second person on a work and fire, as opposed to throwing this kid out and who had been voted in again the night that I was voted in. And he showed me in that moment what real leadership in general, doesn't have to be a fire department. He showed me what real leadership was all about, because he could have sent the guy packing, but he knew that there was, as the volunteer department, he needed every pair of hands he could lay his hands on to be supportive of our efforts. To me, that was a great lesson. And I've used it as a life lesson since then.
So with that, so we have a color code on the helmet tetrahedron. So the company colors are green and gold. So everybody, the firefighters have green tetrahedrons, the officers have gold tetrahedrons, but we countywide, we have folks that have blue tetrahedrons on the helmet. And so what that means countywide is that person is either they're still in training, so they're not an interior firefighter yet, or they're an exterior supporting member or a driver or something along those lines. Maybe they were interior and just, as they've aged, health reasons, what have you.
Sure.
They still want to be an active member of the organization and play a role, but their days of crawling the hallways are done. And so that's understood. I haven't had the situation occur like what you've described. But absolutely, if you've got somebody that can still be a contributing member of the team, let's find a place for them. I have had, accommodations that we've made for members with various different health issues that have occurred, in what would, probably still be considered prime age, as far as firefighting, but they had some health conditions, and they went through their firefighter 1, their firefighter 2, so on and so forth, but they're just, hey, chief, with this whatever issue, I don't think that I can do the interior work anymore. I'm not comfortable doing the interior work anymore. And like, okay, that's fine. Hey, we'll change the color code, and hey, you still got an EMR license. You can still run the medical calls. You can still do some exterior work. You can still drive. You can pump. So that you do have to manage things a little bit differently in the volunteer department than sometimes on the career side of the house. And you have contributed members. Now, I'll tell you that this is something that, it's a debate among different departments is, well, what about if somebody wants to join just to run medical, but they don't want to do anything with fire at all? How do you handle that? Well, I have stood firm in my belief that everybody needs to complete the basic firefighter course. Okay, one that's a state law requirement. If you're going to be on the department, if you're going to be a firefighter, which is just a general term for a member of the fire department, you have to complete certain levels of coursework in firefighting to meet that state statute. But the problem that I don't want to have happen that we almost had happen one time, and it was due to a lack of qualified drivers, was we had members at the station when a structure fire came out just down the road from the station. And we didn't have qualified drivers to get the apparatus out the door. But we had young members and we had young members that were trained that could fight fire, but they hadn't completed driver training yet. I mean, we still got out the door pretty quick, but we had to wait for a driver to get to the station to roll the rig.
Right.
What I don't want to have happen is, okay, I've got 5 or 6 folks that just do medical, and they're hanging out at the station, and that call comes out for a structure fire, and they're sitting there because they're not the firefighters. You know what I'm saying? And so
sure.
Everybody needs to have the basic level, even if they're going to be exterior only. I can live with that. In a perfect world, yes, we want everybody to be interior firefighters, but we don't live in a perfect world. And sometimes we have to adapt and overcome the best that we can, given the circumstances and the personnel and the equipment that we have in our particular situation. So I do believe in having everyone complete the state's minimum level of fire training, which doesn't include the certification as Fire 1, Fire 2. It's a different course. If they want to primarily do medical, that's fine, but we still have to complete that basic level of fire training.
Right. And they need to know that on shortage time, they're going to be asked to ride the rig, and not the bus, And I agree with you. I think this is not really, if you really want to pick and choose, then go get your paramedics level and go work for a service that does medical calls. And that's it. That you want to, if that's what you're excited about and that's what you have your eyes on, then okay, that's fine with us. Go get the state certification so you can do that, and you'll get hired and go apply to one of the ambulance places.
But what you said though, with that chief, exhibiting that leadership right there, you're absolutely right. I mean, like different chiefs, different personalities can handle that 2 totally different ways. But it sounded like, that your chief, had his eye on the ball, and, he's looking, down the road. He had more of the strategic view, which is what you're supposed to have as the chief. And it's like, okay, so this guy may not be an interior firefighter, but where can I plug him in on the team to make an impact? And so that type of leadership is huge when it comes to retention. You're asking folks to do this for free. Again, we talked about that earlier with the whole fundraising aspect. We're asking them to give countless hours away from their family, away from their hobbies, free time, whatever it is that they like to do, to train, to respond, to do fundraiser activities, all the things that come with being part of the volunteer fire department. And if they don't feel valued, if they don't feel appreciated, if they don't feel like their efforts are worth it, they're not going to hang around, because they're not there for the paycheck. They're not there because they have to pay the rent or the mortgage. They're there because they want to be there. And so you have to strike that balance, of having the high standards, but then still also making it a fun and exciting place to be that they want to come to. Right. And so I think a lot of times we see one extreme or the other. Okay, we see here's the high standards. We got to do this, and this, and it just doesn't become fun anymore. And that's where you lose some folks. And then on the other side, you see that we want it looks like a 3-ring circus, and everybody's having a great time, but nobody knows how to do the job. And so finding that balance in between where we still cut up, we still laugh, we still have a great time. There's a great social atmosphere within the department. But when it's time to do business, it's time to do business. Right. When it's time to play, it's time to play.
That's great. That's exactly what it's about. And I hope that those of you who are listening or watching the video who are with a volunteer or part-paid departments, paid on call, that you'll think about some of the philosophy we've talked about today about the volunteer service. You as a volunteer in your community or part pay, you know what's going on in your department. You know what's going on in the departments around you. You know what the needs are in your community where you live. You have to make that decision, and you can't make it lightly, but you can make a decision that will not only change your life, but change the life of people around you. And people that you don't even know, you can reach out and touch them in ways that you could never imagine in your day-to-day life. But as a volunteer firefighter, you can do that. You can do something with a complete stranger. They don't know you, you know them, that can change their life because of your good actions. And that's what you have to remember, that we are all firefighters for one reason. We all take the oath. We all take the oath to protect life and property of our communities. That's our job. Whether you paid for it or not, that's our job, to protect life and property in our communities. And that's the foundation of who we are in every city, big city, every small rural area, and everything in between. That's who today's firefighters are. We're there to do the job. Sometimes it's a harder job than others. Sometimes it's really easy, and sometimes it's really sad. Nevertheless, we have to use an old biblical term of gird our loins, as the saying goes, put on our gear and do what we've learned to do and take care of people of the community. That's it. That's the bottom line. So if you're can't accept that as the very foundation to start with, then maybe being a volunteer isn't in your immediate future. But if you want to help your community and really reach out there and be there for them when they need help, volunteer fire service is wonderful for you and your community, because who else is going to take care of them? When Mrs. Smith falls in the middle of the night and she calls 911, who's going to take care of Mrs. Smith if nobody joins? If nobody shows up, answers the call, who's going to work that? Who's going to put out that structure fire at the corner of Main and 4th? It's a big fire. You're going to go, or you're just going to stay home? We really don't have the choice once you come on board to make that decision at the moment of the call. When you step up to say, I'd like to join, that's where you make your decision. You agree?
I do. I get very frustrated when folks either cherry pick calls or, well, I'm only going to respond, when it's convenient. I'm not gonna respond when I have family in town. And I'm just going to throw it out there. Your family knows that you're on the fire department, right? You've told them this. They understand it's a volunteer fire department. You wear a pager goes off. You got to go help people. If you come visit me at my house, okay, and the pager goes off, depending on what our staffing level is and everything, I'm probably going. I'm probably going. I'm very blessed that now I don't have to make every single call that comes out, because sometimes the guys don't need the chief standing over their shoulder. They've been trained, they've been equipped, they know what to do. And let's just face it, whether you're career or volunteer, sometimes the chief being there, it just makes you uncomfortable. So I understand that as a chief, because I remember that as a firefighter. So if I've got 5 or 6 guys rolling in on a medical call, I let them take that. A lot of times I'll go to the station and I'll cover the station. So if a second call comes out, because we get that a lot. But if you come visit me, if you come visit Brandon Fletcher at his house, he is a volunteer firefighter. If the pager goes off, he's going. He's going. I mean, that's just that is what it is. When I go visit family, which all my family that lives local, we're also on the department or on the department, so they get it, they understand. But this whole, I'm just going to respond when it's convenient. I've been doing this for 22 years. And I don't know of any time that the pager has ever gone off at a convenient time.
Okay.
Even if I'm down there at the station already, for whatever reason, chances are we were doing something. So, all right, we got to stop training. We got to stop this, stop whatever we were doing, which that's fine. That's what we signed up for. But if you're going to use convenience as your definition of, well, if I'm not doing anything else, then I'll respond. You know what? I don't need you. Turn your stuff in. When you join the volunteer fire department, you volunteered to follow the rules. I think Billy Goldfeder said that. And that's absolutely true. That was the end of the volunteering. Everything else now is part of the job. And that is my philosophy. I mean, within reason. Now, if you're doing something with your family and you know that 5 other people are taking that call, okay, so be it. I can live with that. But when you have 2:00 in the morning, Mrs. Smith has fallen and called 911 or pushed her life alert button, and 1 or 2 people show up because, oh well, I got to work the next morning, and you join the volunteer fire department, or oh well, I didn't respond because we knew so and so had the call. Well, so and so is thinking that Jim Bob has the call, and you end up that complacency can end up leading to a non-response or a very understaffed response when you know that you got people in the district and available.
Right.
And so it gets frustrating sometimes, but no, I absolutely agree. And you know what? Just kind of talking about PR and marketing and reputation of the organization. To me, I will run fallen party calls all day long because they are public relations gold for a volunteer fire department. Because when you pick Mrs. Smith up out of the floor at 2:00 in the morning, she is going to be so grateful and so appreciative 99% of the time. And guess what? She is going to tell everybody she knows about the wonderful folks from the fire department that showed up to help her at whenever it happened, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, it doesn't matter. And that's right there. You show up and provide her a positive experience. 1, you get her up out of the floor, but then 2, you connect emotionally. You're polite, you're respectful, you're professional. She's going to remember that. And she's going to tell everybody about it. And the reputation for the fire department is going to continuously improve, from those types of calls, those types of experiences. I mean, it can happen with any call, but generally, if we're running heart attacks and strokes and whatnot, there's a lot of things going on. People aren't necessarily remembering all of the individual rescuers that came in to do their best that day. They may not. But if you pick somebody up out of the floor because they fell down, they're going to remember that. And they're going to connect emotionally with you if you come in there polite and professional. So that's PR gold in the volunteer fire service. But no, I agree with you. I agree with what you said 100%. I'm all over that.
You mentioned about family visiting. I was in that situation in my second apartment. We had family in for a Jewish holiday. We had finished the main dinner part of it. There was just a little bit of the ceremony to finish. And page went off for a working house fire confirmed by community police. So I took off and went down the station. I was only about less than a mile from the station from my home. Drove down there, got on the first, happened to make the first apparatus, and we had a working house fire. That's what it was. Well, that was it. It was a couple of hours, cleaned up, went back. They were all fine with the dinner. They had cleared the table and everything like that. And I'd been, you okay? What was it? And I told everybody what went on. And that was that. And then many years later, one of the members of that family wrote me a very nasty letter. And part of that was because I left in the middle of that dinner. Now, this family happens to live in a northeastern state, and their home is protected by several volunteer, or now might be part pay. I haven't been there in quite a while, but then they were all volunteer departments, of the 3 departments that would respond to their home. Lovely home, but all volunteers. I took my niece and nephews to the first firehouse to take them to visit and let them see it. And they got, all excited. But that's, to me, I couldn't understand that. I couldn't understand how somebody in my own family who knows what I'm doing would hold it against me when I went to help somebody else, when they would need that same kind of help at their home should the same situation arise. They'd be looking, where are the firefighters? Where are the firefighters? Well, they're not coming. It's a holiday for them. What? Fact is, listen, we don't have holidays.
No.
We have days that our load is less than another day. That's it. That's what our calendar is.
I agree 100%.
And, if you want to be listen, is it a challenge to be a volunteer? It has always been a challenge to be a volunteer. It's nothing new. It's always been a challenge to be a volunteer. But when you make that choice to become a firefighter, again, volunteer or paid, you're in for the buck, you're in for the money. That's what it's all about. You're willing to say, I'm going to sign on the dotted line. I'm going to take this oath. I'm going to do what it takes to fulfill that oath. The oath isn't complex. I swear to protect the lives and property of the people in my district. So help me God. Okay, that's it. You're sworn in.
Yeah.
But your fire life doesn't just end there and you're a member. You have to now do everything that every other member has to do so that you're qualified to get out there. And then when you are qualified, you're willing to be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Absolutely agree.
So, I think that we've really given some great information. Your leadership, the classes that you teach, and this new article about leadership in the volunteer fire service, which is very, very important. Again, more so today because the face of the volunteer fire service has changed over the last 40 years. There's no doubt about it. And only an old fart like me, you can look back and see those differences and the changes coming through from, the mid 70s when I started till 85 when I got hurt. But I've always kept it a part of me and stay connected to it. And that's why I created this podcast, because I was cajoled by some people on social media who said, oh, you talk really good about when you were a firefighter and firefighting stuff. Why don't you do a podcast? And once they finally talked me into it, I didn't even know what a podcast was at that time. I had done a radio show for 3 years with another firefighter from my community, but we recorded it. It was broadcast on AM radio stations, and then it was circled up to HME in the old days, and they had a server that would put it on the internet, so people could hear us on the internet, but it wasn't a podcast. There weren't podcasts at that time. And I figured, okay, well, if I can get, maybe 10, 15 firefighters to listen to one of my podcasts, I'd be a happy guy. And then we started looking at the analytical side of it. And all of a sudden we see we're in 4 countries. Then we're in 8 countries. And by third season, since the third season, we're right around 40 countries around the world that we have listeners in. And so to me, it's important, just like we talked about being a firefighter and a volunteer, to me, it's important to get these messages out, bring on the guests that can talk about the topics that are so important to the fire service today. And other things that will also benefit our brothers and sisters in law enforcement and in EMS. And, some things we have to talk about will help our brothers and sisters who are road rangers or recovery operators, because one of the biggest things we're facing, and there was just in Chief Billy's secret list that came out, I think it was yesterday or this morning, a pumper tanker that was called to block a highway was broadsided by a semi.
I saw that on social media.
Right. And luckily the firefighter had minor injuries, the driver. But this is one of the things we're facing when we're responding to active roadway incidents. And whether it's a 2-lane country road or it's a 12-lane superhighway, it doesn't make any difference.
Right.
And so we did a podcast back in December on keeping with Chief Richard Gasaway, Dr. Gasaway from Situational Awareness, to talk about that every time those bells go off, your pager goes off, the tones go off. From that moment till you get back to the firehouse, you have to keep your SA around you. You have to know your situational awareness. As you get on the rig, you have to know what the job is you're going to be, what your job is going to be on the scene, what you have to do. And you have to, while you're there, you still have to watch out for everything else. That's the way it has to be, because we're losing. In January of this year, I think we lost 4 firefighters in struck bys, as the Institute for Respond to Safety Institute keeps track of it. It's either 3 or 4 that we lost this year, just in January. And it's not stopping. And so whether you're career department or volunteer department, keep your situational awareness around you. Know what's going on around you. Don't just step off the rig because the rig stopped. Make sure your way is clear when you get off that rig. We want to keep you. We want to keep all of you. Keep you healthy, keep you well, help you doing this job that you've given part of your life to be part of in the volunteer or the career fire service. Just be safe so you can go and answer that next call and support your department and your community every time. That's what it's about.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Chief, I can't thank you enough. I know we had a couple of bumps getting to today since March. I do apologize for that, but I'm really pleased with our discussion today. I think a lot of the leadership and not just leadership, but governing your philosophy of running a department in 2022, I think is spot on where it has to be. And I think it needs to be shared with not just volunteer chiefs, but career chiefs and career firefighters. There's really no difference, because you got to step up. You want to do the job. This is not choose one from column A and one from column B. This is the call comes in, you respond to the call, and that's it.
It's interesting. So you say that, and I feel like if more chiefs, if more captains, on the career side had to manage volunteer employees, that their approach would be a little differently with their career employees, because when you have to manage folks and lead folks that are there because they want to be, not because they have to be, you have to take a completely different approach. You don't change the standard. You still have the high standards.
Right.
But, they're not dependent upon you for that paycheck. Now, granted, poor and toxic leadership, even if subordinates are dependent upon you for a paycheck, that just means that they might have to hang around a little. They can't just walk out the door that day, but they're going to start looking for a better place to go. But if you can make a paid organization a place that people want to come to and want to be a part of, you're not going to win everybody over, okay? But if you can make that kind of culture where folks enjoy coming to work, then imagine the productivity possibilities are endless, and so that's something on the volunteer side that we keep in mind, and I love it when folks, oh, you're just a volunteer chief. And it's like, oh, really, just a volunteer chief. The difference is, the size of the budget that I manage. That's really what it boils down to. I have to deal with the same problems. I have to deal with the same issues. I have a smaller budget that doesn't include payroll. Again, I know there's political differences, that I don't have to deal with collective bargaining and those types of things. But as far as running the department and how you treat people, leadership is leadership. Whether it's, a paid employee or a volunteer employee, good leadership is good leadership across the board. It doesn't matter. I tell people, that the big secret about leadership is, it doesn't matter who's writing it, what book it is, who the speaker is. Okay, good leadership is going to look pretty consistently the same across the board. Okay, it's just all packaged differently, whether you read John Maxwell or Colin Powell or, whatever, leadership book you want to throw in. At the end of the day, they're all telling you to do the same thing. Okay, they're just packaging it different. They maybe have a different, 10 or 13 step process or whatever it is that works for them. And that resonates differently with some people. Some people may connect immediately with like Frank Viscuso, Step Up and Lead, or, Jocko and Leif, or, Colin Powell book or the John Maxwell book, but at the end of the day, they're saying the same stuff. It's just, they're saying it differently. And so quality leadership looks consistently the same across the board, as does toxic leadership. Looks consistently the same across the board. And so whether your staff is a paid staff or a volunteer staff, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the culture that leadership has allowed to grow and develop with the organization, with regard to the morale of employees. And again, morale is a metric in our data-driven world. It's not a quantifiable metric per se, but morale is just as important as response times and percentage of calls made on the volunteer side, and the overall cost per call, the cost of fuel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you're forgetting to keep your thumb on the metric of morale in your organization, chances are it's going to slip away. It's going to be poor. Employees are not going to be happy whether they're paid or not. Right. So that's my summary, if you will.
Great point. Great point to close on. But it's true. It's true. It's career or paid, we still do the same things. That's what it boils down to. So we need leaders who see that and understand the other thing. I think we have also can't lose sight of the human factor, because that's who we are. That's the bare person. No bunker gear, no helmets, no masks. We're just another human. And so we have good days, we have bad days, we have healthy days, sick days, and we have off days. Something happened maybe in the family or in the household that just put us in a crappy mood. Okay, that can happen. But instead of beating on somebody when they come in like that, take a moment and reach out to them. Say, is everything okay?
Sure.
And it might be something very simple, but by getting it off, letting them get it off his or her chest, makes them feel a little bit better, because they're not keeping it packaged inside. And if they'd responded to a call with all that gnawing at them from the inside, they may not quite do as well to their previous top levels because they're off that day. And we have, as long as we understand that and make sure that a good leader, whether it's the lieutenant or the captain, doesn't have to necessarily be the chief, but somebody says, hey, Billy, are you okay? You seem really off on that call today. Just didn't seem the the go-to guy that I always see in these calls. Yeah, I'm sorry, Cap. We won't have any, it's just something at home. Okay, but everybody's all right. You're okay. Yeah. That's it. Those 15, 20 seconds can make a difference on how that firefighter is going to be on their next shift. Absolutely. Or if they're responding on the next alarm, because they know, you know what, somebody gives a damn about me, not just the way I'm holding the hose or I'm tying a knot. They just care about me. Am I okay? And if we all embrace that as the baseline, I don't think there's anything that can hold us back.
I agree. That's really one of those kind of step one in leadership is you have to care. You have to care about your people. Doesn't mean you let them off the hook. Doesn't mean you lower the standard, but you have to genuinely care. And when someone knows that you genuinely care about them, not only are they going to work hard, to do what you ask them to do, but they're going to feel valued because they know that you view them more than just a simple employee, just a worker bee. You actually care about their well-being as a person. I think it was Theodore Roosevelt that said, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's, I've used that quote throughout, my leadership teachings. And I had a first sergeant in the military that was kind of his signature line, and he lived it. It wasn't just a little signature at the end of the email. He genuinely cared about all of the troops. Didn't mean that he wasn't going to call you in and chew you out when you screwed up, because he absolutely was. But he genuinely cared about you as an individual, and everybody knew that. So you got to care. That's
Exactly.
That's like rule one.
Right. Very true. Very true. Well, Chief, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I know it's a short staff day over there, and you might have had to go on the call. Luckily, we lucked out. The tones didn't go off, and I really love the way you embrace leadership, and yet you don't put yourself on the pedestal. You're talking right from the floor where everybody else is, to guide them and lead them that way, rather than trying to stand up on a pedestal. You do this, you do that, you do that. Now I'll judge you based on, but you don't have that approach. You care about the people.
It keeps you from getting disconnected.
Right.
When you stay out there on the floor with the, with your rank and file,
Exactly.
and they appreciate that. And so it's definitely an effective approach.
Very true. Very true. Well, again, our thanks to Chief Brandon Fletcher. And congratulations on this article being published in Firehouse Magazine. If you are watching the video, this will be the end of the show. If you're listening to the audio, well, you know that we're going to be right back right after these few words. To those that are leaving us, thank you very much for joining us. We're pleased to have you, and we'll see you again very soon. If you're listening to the audio, we'll be back right after these messages. As always, please stay tuned.